Welcome to Sewing Out Loud, the official podcast of Zede Sewing Studio. Here are your hosts, Zede and Mallory.
Sewing Out Loud. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Mallory Donahue.
And across the table is Zede Donahue.
That's right, and we're just going to get into it today. Today we have an episode request, and I'll play you the request. Everybody ready?
Hey there, Zede, Mal, and Sam Bam. I had an idea that maybe you folks could turn into some sort of podcast.
So that was the voice of Fred Berry.
Yes, our friendly Canadian neighbor.
One of our lovely neighbors to the north. And I'm not going to play you her whole thing.
It's very entailed.
It's a little long, and she said she's a little tired because Fred attends births.
Yeah, but she didn't sound tired. She sounded really good.
She sounded fine. Yeah. But yeah, I can't imagine many more exhausting.
No, it was long, and it wasn't rambling. It was very to the point.
Can you imagine many more exhausting, occupations than attending a birth?
You know
You're
what?
a nurse.
I will tell you, the only thing more tiring. Uh-oh. Fred wants to talk. Fred wants to talk to Sam.
Okay.
Anyway. Oh, that was funny. The only thing that's more tiring, than giving birth is being at someone else's. Yeah, because you're like, well, I want that baby to come out. I don't even get to take it home. I want that baby to come out now.
Why can't they just pop that baby
out?
I
could be eating or doing something else, but no, I'm waiting for this baby to come out.
Yes.
And I don't even get to keep the baby.
Yes. You get to hang out with my babies.
I do.
So, what Fred was asking about in her charming message is she's gotten 2 new machines this year. One's a new Baby Lock Serger and one is Baby Lock Rachel. And so she wants to know about stitching out samples of stitches that are on her machine.
Right. Basically getting to know her machine, and how the stitches function, what they do.
She wants to keep a sample book. We think this is a fabulous idea. She was thinking about, should I do every stitch on a knit and a woven?
Right.
Should I do every stitch with and without stabilizer?
Right.
Should I, how should I do this? And one of Fred's longings that maybe she'll be a little disappointed in is she's like, I just want to sit down and do this in a very systematic way, and learn about my machines. And you can do that.
You can.
But we're going to talk about building up a library of samples and how to approach this whole process. So learning what your machine can do before maybe you need to have a technique like in a project, right?
I guess what I would say to Fred, and I don't know how anal she can get about this kind of stuff, right? Or how, but you will learn it better if maybe you approach it in little chunks or something and not all at once. The other way I learn things better is to actually utilize them. So I would set up a system like a notebook where I could add or subtract, pages or stitches, however I was going to do this, or a file system. Some people put it like in a 3x file system kind of thing, or 4x5, whatever it is.
I liked your 3x file.
3x file, whatever, staple the sample onto the card or whatever.
Yes.
And, in all of these samples, you want to add what stitch is this, what's the width, what's the length, what thread are you using, what bobbin thread are you using. You want to make sure you have a description of what you've done.
Yes. And I think there are sort of 2 different explorations going on here. Okay. First of all, the Rachel has 50 stitches, and some of them are decorative. Okay. Right. Your serger can have lots of stitches too.
Right. It's not going to have as many as any sewing machine.
Sure. But then there are techniques.
There's techniques, and there's threads, and there's fabrics.
Yes. So you might, Fred, have this combination of, okay, do you want to see what every stitch on your Rachel just looks like?
Right.
If you want to see what they look like actually stitched out on fabric, I'd recommend, a woven and a piece of tearaway, and stitch out that line of stitching. Note which number it is. I mean, it might be pretty
Right.
obvious to you, but you can note which number it is, and you can just see, oh, this is the scale of this, or this is
Right.
what this scallop stitch looks like. I think there's like a Greek key
And
stitch.
in most sewing machines, the stitches are organized already for you. Utility stitches, stretch stitches, decorative stitches, buttonholes. So you already have those categories.
Yeah,
so
so-
you can also, keep those categories.
So one thing you could do just to get started on all of this is literally just to put in, so let's talk about thread. If you want to see what your stitches just look like,
Right.
I would put in a machine embroidery thread.
I would too. I would put in a decorative smooth thread so I could
Yes.
really look at the stitch.
A machine embroidery thread is like a lightweight thread. We used to sell Floriani. There's
Can
sulky,
be polyester, can be
rayon, something like that.
It actually can be cotton.
It'll show you the shape of the stitch. So that's one thing, that you might do first. Now, when you are going to actually do things practically,
Right.
stitching out your blind hem stitch on one layer woven and one layer stabilizer doesn't teach you how to do the blind
Right.
hem,
Well,
right?
I guess what I would say, you're saying one layer of woven and one layer of stabilizer. What I would do is on my utility stitches, I would do 2 layers of a woven.
Okay,
Okay.
I see.
Your sewing machine is meant to sew on 2 layers in all of its stitches. It's rarely meant to sew on 1 layer. Most stitches are meant to sew on 2 layers. That's how it's set up. That's how every technician will test it out, is on 2 layers of fabric. Now we know that we need stabilizer with decorative.
Yeah. So what
thread-
mom is saying
stitches.
is that yes. So if you're gonna do that 2 layers of woven
Right.
for your utility ones, do that. Decorative stitches, you could do that on 2 layers, or if it's
I wouldn't. I would do is the stable. I would do it just like I was going to do it in real life.
right.
So utility stitches, I'm always stitching on 2 layers.
Right.
Okay, of fabric, because I'm putting a seam together.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what I'm doing, or I'm top stitching or something like that. And then on decorative stitches, certainly I have never done a decorative stitch that I liked without stabilizer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would use a stabilizer, whether it's on 1 layer or 2 layers or whatever. I would definitely have a stable, and no matter what kind of fabric it was. But generally, I would start out with a nice woven piece of fabric
Mhm.
and a good stabilizer, a good tearaway stabilizer, probably.
So we're talking about wovens and talking about seeing the shape
Mhm.
of that stitch. And if your machine does have the category of stretch stitches,
Right.
then you're going to go over to stretch stitch.
That's
and
right.
here's where, of course, there's a wide variety of woven fabric. Of course. So I don't want to discount that or have people be like, there's different weaves of fabric. I know that. But a lot of you probably have access to quilting cotton pretty quickly. Okay.
And
or
I would use
a
something. I
muslin
would
or-
use something at least as heavy as quilting cotton. Muslin, no.
It's very
Okay.
thin.
People stitch on muslin. It's just not. Okay, first of all, that's not what you're going to be stitching on most of the time.
Okay.
So it's not going to give you the sample that you want to refer to anyway, and it's just not enough. It's not enough of. It doesn't have enough of weight or density.
Yeah. I mean, people
Right.
do sew on lightweight fabrics, but
Yes.
but if you're trying to see this, the sturdier
Right.
woven will be good. But with knits, this is where things get a little what kind of knit are you going
Right.
to sew on for your samples?
Right.
That can get a little tricky. Are you going to use stabilizer? Are you not? But Fred, this is where you can use the stabilizer with. You can do
You
the
experiment.
stitch with, and you can do it without, and
Like
write it
Zede
down.
says, test, test, test.
And this is where I'd say you need to keep this sample book around,
Yes.
and you need to keep it, editable. I know
Yes.
Fred likes 3-ring binders. She's told me this before.
And 3-ring binders, I think are really great, especially, and if you use the plastic sleeves.
Yes.
Where you can put stuff inside and out, in and out, and you can pin or sew that sample on some sort of paper or cardstock, and you've got everything labeled on there. Like I said, your stitch length, everything, stitch length, stitch width, type of thread, type of if the bobbin thread's different. I want to know that too. And the type of fabric it is.
So when you're playing around at the sewing machine with your preliminary sample doing, and you're like, oh, try it with and without stabilizer,
Right.
like, yay, good, okay. But then let's say you're getting ready to make a pair of pants,
Right.
and you end up doing some top stitching,
Mhm.
like you would on your ginger jeans. I know Fred's made some other, pants that she has shared in the group. So you're doing that, and you decide that you've got your top stitch thread in the top and your construction thread on the bottom.
Right.
Your
Construction
thinner-
thread is in the bobbin.
Yeah, your thinner construction thread.
Oh, another thing you might want to put down is the needle and needle size, needle
Right.
type. I didn't
So-
say that.
So you put all that down, and maybe you actually use a little bit of scrap fabric from those jeans you're making to make yourself a little sample with your notes. So you can
Absolutely.
say, oh, when I sew on a fabric of this thickness,
That's right.
this stitch length and these settings are what helped me. And this needle,
Right.
I
So,
hammered it.
so
I,
right. And
whatever.
so I guess what Mallory and I are saying is, to me, and I think Mallory sort of agrees with me, the best approach, it's hard sometimes to sit down and stitch out every single stitch
yeah.
that's in your machine, okay? But you're going to have a buttonhole episode on some fabric you're not used to, or a top stitching episode on something you're not used to, or a decorative stitch on something you're not used to. That's where you can make all of these samples and keep them. And what I like about this is there's a goal. There's a goal to get it right.
Mhm.
There's a goal for it to look nice. There's a goal for it to be successful. And therefore, I'll come up with it and I'll remember it because I've done it.
Yeah. So
And I'm going to utilize it.
I think that it's in guide class. So what we used to do when we sold sewing machines and we had to teach people how to use them is we would take them through quite a few stitches
Right.
on a sample fabric. We would do something on a knit.
We would go into every part of the menu.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
So it was, and depending on the machine, that would really take care of it. And then you get to these machines that have 900 stitches. Of course, we're not going to get through all of that in one class.
Right.
But it is kind of nice to see them and then also to see them used.
Yes.
So in your manual, you will see how they recommend to do a blind hem.
Right. They'll have
You'll-
recommendations
yeah,
there.
A lot of times in the baby lock manuals, they have how to put it in a zipper.
Right.
So don't limit yourself to just the stitch.
Or the plain old flat stitch you're saying on a sample.
Feel free to also include techniques. I don't know. I mean, I've not done this, but maybe it would be good for me to include the steps of a fly
Right.
physically. And actually,
Well, and that could be a technique book versus your sewing your
sample
stitch book.
Yeah.
Right.
and if you know that you love a certain type of fabric and you love to sew with it, like stretch denim,
Right.
I'm going to make a ton of jeans.
Right.
I'm just going to mess around with this. I'm going to mess around with top stitching on 2 layers and
Right.
4 layers, and I'm going to mess around with
And I'm going to try this needle or that needle, or why can't I just use a microtex needle instead of worrying about having a denim needle on hand? Whatever.
Maybe you want to have a little sample sewing session before you start. And in the wardrobe planners that we publish, there is a section that says techniques to explore.
Right.
Where you can make a note. Maybe you find a really great online tutorial that you just want to go back to
Right.
over and over again, or you're going to somehow do that. That's a good thing to put in the wardrobe planner as well. The knit thing. I get a lot of questions. Why is this knit, acting this way, and this other knit didn't act this way?
Oh, man. There are endless answers to that.
The structure of knits.
The structure, how many times was it dyed? Was it over dyed?
How much spandex it has in
what
it.
is the density of it? What else?
So if you know that you have on hand some Ponte, and you have some double brush poly, and you have some rayon knit,
Right.
and you have some all these things, and you're like, I just want to be prepared. And I think Fred is a very, just Canadians, I guess, I don't know if they have the Girl Scouts in Canada. They have something.
I believe they do.
Always
but I
be
don't know.
prepared, right? So get out a few scraps of that and see what your stretch stitches look like. And make a note, oh, this does stretch nicely for me.
Right.
This would be good for a seam.
Well, and
you
the
know?
other thing is so you have the sample book and you look at it and you go, oh, well, I started out with this kind of thread and this kind of needle, and I'm on this, I'm using a fabric very similar to this time.
Uh-huh.
Still test.
Oh, sure.
But it
Great.
gives you a starting place. Also make notes on what didn't work or what you, and don't make assumptions. Just say, this didn't work. It looked like this. Don't say because I didn't do this or because I didn't do. Don't make those assumptions. People run into making assumptions about, oh, I should have had my presser foot pressure down. No, you didn't do it. If you didn't do it, don't write it in there.
Yeah.
Don't make it up.
Don't make up evidence.
Yeah,
Is that what
exactly,
she said?
exactly. Riley and I talk about that all the time. Like, don't make up evidence. State what happened, not what you think happened.
Do you know that, like, the researcher who's made all of these very popular diet suggestions has been discredited? Like, he is the person who is behind companies making 100-calorie packs.
Uh-huh.
And the idea that you should put food on a smaller plate.
Uh-huh.
And keeping fruit out on your counter, that these things are somehow correlated to weight loss. Like, they're not. His studies don't actually say this.
So he did some of his own
statistics
yeah.
fishing, apparently.
Yeah. Well,
and he admitted it in a blog
statistics
post.
can be like manipulated. That's for sure.
So anyway, I'm just telling y'all.
Oh, good. Well, I don't buy that crap anyway.
We don't want to be coming into your sample book and seeing any statistics fishing. Is what
That's right. Well, here's another thing. So I see this on our in our Facebook groups all the time, where it says, "I've lost my sewing mojo. How do I get it back? What do I do?" Okay. This is the time to sit down with some very, very pretty thread and some very nice stabilizer and a nice piece of fabric and just start stitching those decorative stitches.
Decorative stitches.
And do mindless stitching.
Okay.
Mindless, pretty stitching. And you will get it, there's no way you can know what those look like unless you stitch them out.
Absolutely.
And what they do or how they go back and forth on top of each other, or is it going to look good with a wing needle or not a wing needle and all that kind of stuff.
Wing needle.
Yeah, so when people say that about the mojo, I want to say, get it up. I used to do a thing where I would always have a crazy quilt going. Mallory and I often had a crazy quilt going. And if I didn't feel like sewing something that was utilitarian or something, I would just get that crazy quilt out and start doing
go to town
stuff. Because there was no plan. It was an evolution, and I would just use the decorative stitches
and see what they look
right.
like. Yeah, let's take a little break here and come back and just talk about decorative stitches a little bit more and different needles. Okay.
Sure. Hey, Mal.
Hey, Mom.
I heard you were easy.
Oh no!
What does that mean?
No, it means I think what you really heard was, wow, Mallory, your easy tee looks so good on you.
Oh,
yes.
I should have known that it was something about something you made.
Like you said, you're getting into your golden years. Sometimes mishearing things. It happens.
No, you're
right?
the one that mishears things. I know this. You make lapel pins about it.
Okay, so I am currently wearing an Easy Tee, and I wear them all the time. The Easy Tee is a semi-fitted, short-sleeve T-shirt made out of a woven fabric, and you draft the Easy Tee to fit your measurements by taking the Easy Tee class.
Well, how do I take this class?
It's an online class that you can watch anytime on sewhere.com. To purchase the class, go to sewhere.com/EasyT. That's just EASYT.
Is this on my computer?
It's on your computer. It's on your phone. It's on your iPad. The class is divided up into short, easily consumable segments, some of which you may not ever need to watch ever again, but some of which you might want to revisit. So you have the ability to mark lessons as completed and also to star lessons so you can go back and revisit the ones that are most important to you.
And I can vouch, Mallory's Easy Tee is a lot easier than Mallory is.
Once again, go to sewhere.com/easyt to begin your pattern drafting journey. Sewing out loud. And we're back. All right, so I've sold this story before. I had a woman come in and she'd bought, a pretty pricey machine, like several $1,000s, right? And I delivered the machine to her, which means that I had taught her about the machine and we'd sewn on it together for, an hour or two. And she comes in and she says,
We called it a sit-down delivery.
Sit-down delivery. She said, this is...
The reason we called it a sit-down delivery is people thought we were going to deliver it to their house when we didn't say sit down. Wrong.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So she comes in and she's very upset because she stitched out a bunch of decorative stitches and they look like crap. They look terrible. These stitches were some very dense stitches, things like butterflies and balls, like circles
Right.
that are filled with satin stitching. And she'd stitched them all really close together on one layer of polyester satins and
Halloween
icework.
fabric.
Yeah, satins and icework.
I call it that Halloween. It's that fabric they only sell at Halloween that is like crunchy, awful, supposed to be satin, isn't really, but it's
And
great
it
for a
was-
Halloween costume.
It was cross-woven, like blue one way, purple the
Oh,
other.
yeah.
I can see this in my head.
Crisp. It was real
yeah.
crispy.
It was real crispy,
Yeah.
which can be fine. And I've got nothing against
Yeah.
that fabric at all.
Oh, there's not a fabric I haven't ever used except that one. But
yeah,
anyway.
I know.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'll try to find some evidence of you using that.
Yeah, I've used it, I'm sure. But not because I wanted to.
Okay. Not willingly. All right. So, she says these stitches look awful. She'd done these very heavy stitches very close together on some really thin fabric. And I was like, I understand. I was like, but this fabric will not be able to handle these stitches on its own. And so I did a very thin fabric and I showed her some stitches just on the fabric and then with stabilizer underneath.
Right.
Made a world of difference. And stabilizer is, as opposed to interfacing, is something that you think of as coming away, not being left behind
Right.
forever in the project. And so this is a tearaway. I did some stitches and they just looked so much better. And we changed nothing about the machine.
Right.
So she was like, oh, okay. I mean, she totally got it. So I just want you to keep that in mind if you are going to do things like that.
Right.
You know-
Anytime you have a buildup of stitches, for
Uh-huh.
instance, like a satin stitch or something like that, or where the stitches are going back and forth and on top of each other, you need support underneath.
And it's surprising how there's a stabilizer called Sulky. Oh my gosh, it's like super stable, or is it? Oh my god, I'm blanking.
Like the
Totally stable. It's called
Uh-huh.
Totally Stable, and it's really thin.
Yes.
And you would think, oh, this won't make that big of a difference. It makes
And it
such a big
does.
difference. It is also fusible.
Yes.
I love that. So if you are a Fred and you want to systematically do this or set yourself up for systematically
Right.
doing this, you can cut yourself some big squares of
Right.
fabric and fuse the stabilizer on the back and just leave a stack of them next to your machine. And you
Absolutely.
could do that. This is also a great thing for kids to do.
Yep.
Especially Fred's got this electronic machine where you can change the stitches really easily.
Right.
So if her kids see the alligator stitch, they can just go to it,
Right.
stitch it. Next thing they want is the leaves.
Yeah.
Boom. This is wonderful. And they
Lindsay used
got
to
that.
like to stitch out new stitches when I got a
remember
machine.
setting Catherine up,
Right.
like that. So that can be fun too. So that is a little tip to keep those things nearby. But I think that you might want to divide up your sample labeling, like Mom said.
Yes, I think you're going to probably want categories.
Yes.
You know, if you want to refer, more than likely, let's talk about a zigzag stitch. Where does it belong?
So many places.
Right.
Yeah.
But, a zigzag stitch I would have probably on my first or second page anyway, right?
Okay.
Because it's a finishing stitch. It's a applique stitch. It's a satin stitch. It's all it's a knit construction stitch. So I know all those things. Okay,
Right.
I didn't always know that.
You didn't.
No, I was not born with that knowledge.
the stitches in your machine, if you have like an electronic or computerized
Right.
machine, when you select them, they're going to have some default settings.
Right. And one of them will be generally the presser foot also.
Uh-huh.
So
Could
you
tell
may
you
may
which-
be wanting to make a note of the presser foot that you have used on a stitch.
That's very good to include there. You can mess with the width and the length on a lot of stitches,
Right.
and see how they do for you,
Right.
right? So
Now some machines even have like sort of the parameters where it won't let you
Oh,
screw
yeah.
up the stitch.
well,
You
were,
know, if you try and alter a decorative stitch, I believe that the Destiny's like that. There's some stitches where it just won't let you get any wider, or it'll only let you go so wide.
No, because they don't want people being like, this doesn't look
No,
like an
this looks
alligator.
really stupid.
Yeah. well,
Well, the machine's not, but you are.
Right.
Yeah. Usually
So-
the machine is smarter than you these days. That's what
yes,
happens.
a lot of those are. And when you were stitching those appliques on those Ariel costumes, and it was so funny because it was working like what you were doing.
Right.
But then I said, oh, I like to use this length and width on the zigzag, which I can't remember right now. But it was just interesting.
I think we got wider and longer actually.
Both of them
Uh-huh.
worked, but one worked better.
We
I think-
like the look better.
Yeah,
even it doesn't even have to work better.
looked
Sometimes it's
better.
the look you want.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
experimenting and testing.
It's not
So
always
important.
function. Sometimes it's an aesthetic that you're
Mhm.
going for.
Yeah, so a zigzag stitch. Oh my gosh. You said knit construction, finishing stitch, satin stitch.
Right.
It can be so many things. This is kind of the same thing with your presser feet, right?
That's right.
So we're getting a little outside the scope of Fred's
But
original question.
Fred, it's what your machine does,
Yeah.
and that's why we're talking about keeping a library that you can add and subtract to.
Yes.
And say that you have an area that is knits.
Uh-huh.
And you don't have your zigzag stitch in there, then put a piece of paper in there that says refer back to zigzag stitch.
There you go.
If you want to do this or whatever, or I did this with a wing needle and I really liked it, whatever.
What's a wing needle?
So wing needle is really something really hot, let me tell you. Okay. So a wing needle, if you would pick it up and look at it from like the top or the bottom, right? Say you put the point towards your face and you
Would
looked
it look
at it.
like it was flying toward you?
Yes, it would. It looks sort of like a cross.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So it's an X.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what that does is it pushes the fibers of the fabric away
Yeah.
and it starts to make a hole in the fabric. And the way it does make a hole is that you have multiple piercings to make that hole. So
Right.
what happens is the same point will be pierced. I don't know how many times it has to do it to make it happen.
Depends on
But
the fabric,
yeah,
I think, too,
yeah.
right?
Well, it has to be a natural fiber.
Right,
Okay, polyesters and knits are going to close up on you.
right.
Okay, so cotton has always been my favorite.
Cotton organdy is
Cotton organdy is
really great for that.
Silk is great.
Mhm.
You have to use the stabilizer. Okay,
Mhm.
you have to use the. So you have to go and pick these stitches. Now, sometimes in your manual it will say good for a wing needle or something like that.
Mhm.
Not always. You may have to find one. And you go, oh, this one has a flower on it, and it looks like it goes towards the center 4 or 5 times when it makes this flower. I'm going to try this one.
Right.
So you wind up with this little minuscule hole in your fabric that becomes decorative.
It's like an eyelet.
It
kind of.
is.
Yeah.
It's similar, very similar to an eyelet.
You are mentioning this needle thing. I think
Mhm.
this is so important. It can make such a difference with your knits.
Yes.
I think most often that's where
And
I see a big
I
difference.
think, the thing about needles is I still become surprised sometimes.
Yes.
Like I think I know.
Yeah, you think
I think I know this
Is
is going to take a stretch needle and this is going to work. And I
Yep.
put that stretch needle in and I'm like, what?
this is awful.
What? This has to be the needle. Okay. Well, okay. And then I'll put in a sharp or a microtex and I'm like, who'd have thought?
No, my big
Who'd have
needle
thought? But this is the one that's working for me this time and I'm going to use it.
my big needle surprise. I'm sorry if I've told this story before, but this was
Oh my God, she gets so boring.
so boring. You know, I've been called a lot of things this week in the Facebook group, and
Boring was not
one of them.
No, you were called nasty and mean
Nasty
and
and
political and all that.
Bring it on.
Bring it on.
Okay.
Bring it on.
Anyway, so needle story. When somebody brought in their machine for service, they take it home. They're about to do all these bridesmaids gifts, and they bring it back, and it's stitching terribly. And I went back to our tech, and I was like, man, I don't know, what's going on here, because he stitched out a sample, and it looked wonderful,
Sure.
So this was, I think, it might have been a rayon blend, rayon cotton, or just a cotton blend, but more than that, it was the feeling of this fabric, okay? It's kind of that really thin t-shirt knit. I don't think it's as popular now as it was.
There was some really thin knits out there for a while. I know that.
It was almost like that burnout texture, and it's slightly flocked.
You could read through it.
Yeah. It was slightly flocked, and these were supposed to be hoodies. Yeah, they were just, they were very trendy. It was very like Abercrombie and Fitch was like, or, making these. I had a hoodie from like the True False Film Festival out of it, okay? And so I recognized this fabric. I was like, I know about this. But it wasn't the fiber content. It was more the structure. Is this knitted,
it was knit,
slightly brushed, flocked stuff. Okay, so it is just making these loops just all over, up and down, everywhere, all around. And so I said, well, I'm going to help you, because that's my responsibility to this person. And we had to use a ballpoint needle on this stuff. So an embroidery needle was not doing the trick. And we had to actually go to a ballpoint needle, and it's...
So she was trying to embroider on them.
Yes, she was trying to embroider.
You didn't make that clear in the beginning, I don't think.
I'm sorry. So this is an embroidery. So yeah, talk about testing stuff, right? It's always a really good idea to test your embroidery if you can. But yeah, I cannot believe the loops and the crap we were getting. And we changed only the needle. I rethreaded the machine first and tried to stitch
because that's what you always do.
No, it was the simplest thing, too. Right. It was just a very nice letter using a very nice design. And it looked, I was just appalled. I didn't know the answer.
So like I said, I'm still surprised sometimes that it's the needle. Because I'm using the needle that the chart says to use, and I think I'm on the fabric that the chart has explained to me, and I think I've done it before, and it's just not looking right, and I'll change my needle. It's happened to me in the serger.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I wanted to say, we've sort of been talking about sewing machines. Let's talk about the serger a little bit. Fewer stitches, right, Mom?
Absolutely.
Than...
what people don't believe is... a serger these days is less complicated than a sewing machine, actually.
A lot of the time. Of course, it depends on what kind you have.
Right.
What I find funny is the way that when we sold the baby locks, the way the line was structured, the line of sewing machines is in sergers, there's the overlockers, and then there would be the overlocker / cover stitch combination, right? And people would get really intimidated by the cover stitch. And I'm like, actually... there's less going on here.
That's right.
There's really less going on with the cover stitch than there is with the overlock functions. So you do have, a few stitches in your serger. We have done episodes about serger stitches.
Right.
And I would run 2 layers. I think this is a really good place for the 2-layer rule
absolutely.
For a lot of things. When you're, or different layers.
Yes.
I guess.
And so if if you're doing a sample, do it along the stretch of the fabric.
Well,
no. Because what I'm saying is people will make a seam and they'll make it along a cross grain that is not stretchy or not a cross grain, a lengthwise grain that is not stretchy at all. Okay, this is when you have something that only stretches east-west, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they will go to stitch later and wonder why it didn't work, because you're not on the greatest stretch of the fabric. So I had someone who worked for me one time cut all of my serger demo samples not on the stretch.
So I just want to say
that doesn't do you any good when you're demoing a stretch.
Mom is talking about stretch stitches. Of course, you use your serger you can sometimes use it to finish 1 layer of woven, or 2 layers of woven. Okay, so I wanted to bring that up. But yeah, if you are trying to get an idea of stretch.
If you're talking about construction, you need to be putting that on the... Now, sometimes you will sew not on the stretch, but what you're really looking for is how is this going to function for me on the greatest stretch of the fabric?
Also, with your serger stitch, it's not over when it comes out of the machine on a stretchy fabric, okay? You need to stretch the stitch. You need to stretch the seam, okay? So I see people running their seams through and like it looks fine, but then they try to stretch it and their needle thread pops.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there's something wrong with their needle tension.
You're talking about testing the
Yes,
stitch.
testing
Again,
the
you've
stitch.
already tested the stitch beforehand before you make your garment, right? And you've tested it on that specific fabric.
Yes. Okay. So what I'm trying to say here
Yeah, I don't know
is
what you're trying to say.
when
I
you're
don't think.
making your sample, like
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
episode's about, okay, don't just run 2 layers and knit through along the stretch and say, oh, I'm good.
Right.
Run them, test that sample,
Right.
stretch the sample. Otherwise, you won't know if it actually is working.
That's correct.
You may say, okay, da-da-da. Now, what Mom's saying is, of course, you're going to test through just to make sure, again, before you do your seam on your garment.
That's right.
But on a sewing machine, using a lock stitch on a woven, sometimes you're like, okay, well, this stitch looks good and it's going to hold.
Right.
Okay. But I don't know. This has never happened to me. It does not happen, I don't think, with these baby lock sergers that we sew on. I've never had a stitch come out not stretchy. I don't.
Well, sure you have when you didn't put the press foot down, but you noticed that your stitch was wrong before you ever. What I'm saying is, you know what a good stitch looks like.
No, what I'm saying is when you
What?
do it, when you
A
do
properly
it
formed
properly, I just
stitch.
never have this problem.
Right.
I don't
Well,
know.
because generally with the baby lock, you're going to get a properly formed stitch.
Yeah. So I
mean,
see
some people
people's-
do pull them, and then the whole, their whole seam will come out.
Yeah, that's.
Or
what
they'll
I'm
say, well, I
saying.
washed my garment and my seam came out. Well, it's not because of the type of stitch you used. It's because whatever stitch you thought you used was not properly formed.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to say
Right.
this whole time. Okay, but I don't know.
So
why
what
that
we're
wasn't
saying,
coming across.
what we are saying is, so you need a stitch library for your conventional machine, and you need a stitch library for your specialty machines.
And
right?
so your serger, I think more than anything, more than just stitching out the different stitches, is stitching them on different fabrics.
That's correct.
Even maybe more so than your sewing
Well, and
machine.
I believe, on your serger, you're going to have, you're going to probably make more notations on, did I use my differential feed? Did I not use my differential
Yeah.
feed?
Yeah.
What was my cutting width?
Stitch
If you have
length.
tension disc, you've got all those tension disc to note. We just say A, B, or C. We have a stitch selector on the baby locks.
You have another thing, we're talking about the sample notebook, which we would have people make in class and stuff.
right.
Another thing, though, that you did, which I thought was really great, there were...
Oh my God, she thinks I was great.
You
Everybody,
finally did
stop.
something.
Moment of silence. Listen.
Finally did something. No.
I can't believe this.
Okay. Mom was using the knit binders from the
Oh, yeah.
cover stitch machine, and she included these notes about settings and type of fabric and just all that jazz. She put them in with the attachment,
That's right.
which I think is so smart. Obviously, you don't need that info unless you're going to use that attachment.
Well, and
it is there
yeah.
with the attachment.
And the other thing I will say again and again and again to everyone is sometimes these notes are only a starting point.
Mhm.
Like you may
right.
be on a different fabric, it might be just a little bit different, but at least you've got a starting point. Another thing on those attachments is where they line up sometimes to the foot, or sometimes I would use the seam on the machine, like where the
Yeah, you wrote
plastic
that down
thing came,
too.
and sometimes I would put like you can put a Sharpie mark on it,
Yeah.
or I would take a piece of painter's tape and write right here, line this edge of this painter's tape up with the edge of the machine or the edge of the foot or whatever. At least it's a starting point.
Okay, so these attachments, I just want to say, these attachments are kind of big, and it's great to keep.
It's because they're industrial. That's why they're big.
It's great to just keep
Right.
storing them in the clamshell that they come in, because they're bigger than my hand, right? So I guess I'm saying obviously like your buttonhole foot or your little blind hem foot,
Right.
they might not stay in their own box. And that's
Well,
why you
and
put,
they probably don't have a box big enough to put a whole
yes.
big note
So
in.
that's why you'd keep that stuff
Right.
in a notebook. But these with the big clamshells or the special
Right.
storage, or if you do have some buttonhole attachment on a machine that is like its own box or something,
Are you
feel free to keep that info
certainly
with it.
anything like a ruffler
Yeah.
or a walking foot? The other thing that we like to keep notes on, and which I think can be a good idea, some people have more than one kind of machine, more than one brand, or maybe you have the same brand. Sometimes the feet, even on the same brand, are not, what do I want to say? Interchangeable.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing is
Compatible.
with the other machine. It just depends on the type of machine and, the height of the shank and all this kind of stuff. So make sure you know what machine you're writing about. Make sure you know that not every machine is the same, that if you did it on machine A, it might not be the same on machine B. The other thing you might want to note, especially on all the machines, Baby Lock uses an alphabet. There's a J foot and a G foot and an H foot and a whatever. But the H foot is also like the blind hammer foot, right? And, the J foot, I call it the jump foot because it jumps the hump. It's got that
it's got
jump.
the button.
Right. So you may want to say, it's the H foot, also known as blind hammer foot.
Yeah.
So that you know that. And then in other brands, they are numbered sometimes, foot 1, 2, 3, or 4. So foot 20 is your open-toed applique foot or whatever. So you may want to note both of those things, that it's called the 20 foot and it's also called the open-toed applique foot.
Yeah, that's really great. So you might have notebooks that are labeled Serger.
Right.
My Enlightened Serger.
That's right.
Notebook. You might have a notebook labeled Destiny Sewing Machine.
Mm-hmm.
And then you might have a notebook labeled Destiny Feet. I don't know.
Yeah.
You've got all these feet. And you're going to town with feet, and you're doing techniques,
Sometimes feet gets into things like appliquing and couching and things like that. So,
and on the serger,
there's notes on that, Fred. You can couch with decorative stitches. Did you know that? That can happen.
Yeah. So, and if you ever end up doing any experimenting like that, document it. So Fred's a great documenter. She's a bullet journaler,
It's also because she's a nurse person.
Well, yes.
Anytime you have to document legally, you're a good documenter.
I think she has she worked in a lab too.
Oh, that's right.
Yes,
Yep. Did you have a research book? I did. We had ours. We used our initials, and then it was like book 1.
She's not here right now.
And then the next book, it was your initials in book 2, and you had and you would date. It was from this time to this time, because everything you did, you wrote down, even if it didn't work. Because sometimes you go back and you can read why it didn't work, and you go, well, I left this out. Maybe I'll try it this way this time.
I always wish I would have written more down.
Oh, yeah?
In my entire life, all the time.
Well, you know what I found funny when I do make a journal or write down or something, and I go back and look at it, I go, that happened in that sequence? Like,
oh, yeah.
Like Mallory did that before Hillary ever went to grade school? Or, that would have been impossible. But, I will have, my memories will be fairly good, but out of sequence for me sometimes. Like, I will remember that you went to school, but I didn't remember that before you went to school was when this happened or something.
Yes, absolutely. No, I think I think that with your sewing, too, especially if you're someone who doesn't get to sew every day. Like,
right.
We remember a lot of things because it's on our minds all the time. You were talking about the numbers of the feet, and
right.
we haven't sold that sewing machine company. Haven't sold their machines in
and I know all
7
the
years, and I'm like, why do I still remember what all their feet
are
for?
I think here's another thing. So you can sit down and you can specifically have this task of developing a library. But what I'm saying is, no matter what, you will develop additions to the library. It will grow. So another thing you may have is an envelope or a box, like plastic shoebox, whatever, or an extra sleeve in this book where you put things that you don't have time to catalog like you want. But I did this, and I'm going to write right here on the back of this fabric that this is da 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 and da 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 da. And I sometimes even write the date, you know me, and my initials. So that later I can put it on the card stock and make it pretty and put it in my nice file. But I don't want to throw away that sample, so I have a place to keep those samples.
I think that's important. And then also, like, I'll just flip side of the mirror image of this idea is, if you come up with something you'd like to test and you don't have time for it, write a little note. Hey, I should test top stitching. Or I should
remember
test
the
this.
one, I had those little pieces of fabric for the serger. It was all the different edges, and a lot of it was woolly nylon. It was decorative edges. That's what it was. And what do you think was on there? 10, 8? I don't know.
Something like that.
Something like that. And people would come in and say, well, show me what a serger does. And I would say, well, this is just the decorative edges. And this mostly has to do with me changing
the thread.
I mean, some of them were wide and some of them were narrow, but and people would go, you're kidding. And I go, no, this is all about the thread on these samples. So I had 8 or 10 samples right there that only had to do with thread.
Yeah.
I didn't change a needle. I didn't change any. All the fabrics were the same, but they all looked different and they all gave a different effect. So it's endless. Fred, you can't sit down and do all of your things just at one time. And
I do want to say,
you'll always be adding. And I know you will. Fred will for sure.
I don't think Fred will be surprised at that.
Right.
At that. But I did want to say that we couldn't promise a end all solution.
Right. But I really do believe the mojo thing when people say I've lost my son. Sit down and play. And playing is developing, okay? Yeah. And playing is fun.
Yeah.
And I have played and found some really fun things, even things to, sew on, put Mylar in my applique or whatever, just, things like that. Just
oh my God, you
playing.
bought more of that spark, shiny knit stuff.
I know. I'm in love with.
I came up here and I was Mom.
I'm in love with lycra that looks like it's slick vinyl, holographic.
The only reason I'm angry is because it makes me want to just make some things.
Well, you're going to be able to because it's costume month.
That I don't have.
It's
time
costume
for.
month, and we're ready.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
I need to be my Zoya the Destroyer.
Well,
wrestling
I believe
person.
This podcast has given people a pretty good idea.
Yes.
Of how they can start an index or a library or whatever they may want to do it. We not only talked about machines, but we talked about fabric a little bit.
Needles.
And you all can have your fabric library too.
Yes, that's right.
Needle libraries, what your needles will do. Take notes, write it down. That's all it takes.
Write
it's
it
no
down.
big deal.
And
those of you who are notebook lovers, I would do it in a notebook. Those of you who are box lovers or file lovers, I would do it in a file. I would do it how I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And the thing that I like about a notebook, I will tell you, is it's portable.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do go to a retreat or something like that, I think a notebook is easier to take.
All right. Well, you can find us on Instagram. We are at Zede Sewing Studio. And then those of you who are in our Facebook group and enjoy interacting with us in that way, also go like Zede Sewing Studio on Facebook. This has to do with being notified about when we go live. And I'm trying to dial that in a little bit better so that you all can know when we come in and go live and do things like that. So anyway, go like Zede Sewing Studio on Facebook. The Self Sewn Wardrobe also has a Facebook page for you to like too. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
So long and so happy.
Thanks for listening to Sewing Out Loud. For even more expert sewing advice, visit sewhere.com.